The first thing that I'm going to start off with is an onion. This is a regular brown onion, but you could also use a white onion if you wanted to for this. And I just start off by cutting off each end of the onion, and then I cut it in half long ways and peel each side. Then once you get each side of the onion peeled, lay it down on your cutting board and go ahead and follow the stripes to slice it. When you follow the stripes, after you cook it, it makes it have those little curly cues that the onion kind of has, but if you cut it the other direction, then it won't keep that little pretty curly onion shape after you cook it. So I like to follow the stripes. Once you get both sides of your onion sliced up, move over to your pan, which should have your nice hot oil in it. I started off with about a tablespoon of olive oil, which I have on high heat, and I've added my onions with, I don't know, somewhere between 1/4 and 1/2 of a teaspoon of kosher salt. And then I'm just stirring it around to make sure that everybody gets nice and coated inside of there. And the next thing that I'm adding is some nice fresh ground pepper. I don't know, somewhere maybe 1/8 of a teaspoon, 1/4 of a teaspoon, not too much. And again, I'm just going to stir everything around to make sure that everything is getting nice and coated. Once I have my onions nice and coated with the oil and kosher salt, I'm going to reduce the heat to like medium-ish and go over here and chop up my bell peppers. So the easiest way to cut up a bell pepper is to just slice it down the 4 sides, get rid of the seed packet, and also get rid of any other little seeds that might be hanging out on your cutting board because they cook up bitter and we don't want them. Now when you cut your bell pepper, you want to cut it skin side down. If you try to cut it the other way where you're cutting through the skin first, you don't have your cutting board directly underneath it, so you can't really cut it as easily because there's like that little pocket of air underneath. So cut it skin side down. And then do your red bell pepper as well. Put them into a bowl together so that they can be friends and let them hang out, and move on to your mushrooms. So here are my mushrooms. I'm using white button. You can also use cremini if you want to. There's a little explanation on my site, bestbitesforever.com, if you'd like to know about the mushrooms. And I'm slicing them about 1/4 inch thick. I've also washed these mushrooms, and the way that I do that is by swirling them in a bowl of water. Notice that there's a membrane going over the gills of the mushroom, so you can't see the gills. That is a sign of a nice fresh mushroom, and that's what you want to look for. It's still fine if the gills are showing, but you don't want for the cap to be turning up. If the cap is turning up on your mushroom, that is a sign of an old mushroom, and you don't want to buy those at the store. Just look for some fresher ones, no big deal, right? Okay, so I'm adding my mushrooms into my pan, which has the onions cooking, and as you can see, because we've taken a little bit of time and cut up the peppers as well as the mushrooms, those onions are getting a tiny little bit of caramelization on them. They have a nice little golden color that's starting to show up. And I'm just going to stir those onions and mushrooms together. I want to get them nice and evenly distributed into my pan so that they cook nice and evenly in my pan. And then I'm going to let them cook down until they look like this. And again, I have my pan on medium heat. The next thing that I'm going to do is I am going to add my Petite sirloin, and I have already sprinkled this with a little bit of kosher salt and pepper. And also, just so you know, I freeze my Petite sirloin before I add it in here. So don't everybody go, oh, but I do it so that I can get the inside of it to stay a medium rare, but I can still get it to have kind of that nice blended flavor of the mushrooms and the peppers and everything. I like my meat to cook in there with the mushrooms and onions for a little bit. So moving on. This is my beautiful French bread, and if you happen to be lucky enough to be able to get an amoroso roll, then that is a bit more traditional. But today I am using French bread, and I'm slathering it in butter, which I am going to then put on my grill, and I'm going to toast, or on my flat top, I guess, whatever you want to call it. And then let's go back over here to the meat. As you can see, if you take a look at my meat, it is still at a nice rare, and it has been over here cooking for a couple of minutes, but like I said, I freeze it, and I do let it thaw a tiny bit so that I can cut it. Like, I'm not chopping up frozen meat because that'd be silly. But look at how beautiful that is, and it is going to be super duper tasty. Okay, so I have my bell peppers in here, and I am stirring everything around. once you get your bell peppers added, you don't want it to cook too long because the bell peppers, not so much the red ones, but the green ones, can overcook pretty easily. So they'll lose that beautiful bright color and they'll get that kind of army olive green color to them, and they won't be as tasty. So now we're on a bit of a clock, and we're going to go back over here to our bread and just give it a little check and make sure it's nice and toasty, which it is. And I'm going to add a nice, wonderful, thick coat of mayonnaise on there. And I like to put a pretty good amount of mayonnaise. Don't be shy with the mayonnaise. I'm not shy with my mayonnaise. After all, fat is flavor, right? So don't be stingy. And the next thing that I'm adding on here is my provolone cheese. I'm doing, well, I have an extra slice, so I'm doing like 3.5 slices on there. But you could also use white American, and some people also like to use Cheese Whiz, which is fine, but just so you know, the very first cheese steak that Pat Olivieri, I'm sure I'm butchering your name, I'm sorry Mr. Pat Olivieri, but okay, when he made it, there was actually no cheese on it. It was just the onions, the meat, and the bread. So it's kind of been built up since then. And you can go on my site. I have a cool little history about it if you want to read it. It's bestbitesforever.com. And moving on, okay, so now I'm just taking this beautiful bread with the cheese, the mayonnaise, and the butter over to my pan of meat, and I'm adding all of that beautifulness on top, and put it on there, shake it down a little bit so it doesn't fall off, and then put the other piece of bread on, and once you get it all put together, this is what you're going to have, and there it is plated up for you.